Thanks, Ken. Ladies and gentlemen, I remember this was late last year, and I was at a group of professional bodies. Ken was there. I think we were talking about a number of issues, including company law changes and the like. And on the way down, as we left, I said to Ken, "Oh, look, this is pretty hard. This is hard stuff and stuff like that. You've got government changes, different areas of the Commonwealth having to relate, states involved." And Ken looked at me and says, "Well, no one said it was going to be easy." I also do take an interest in the feedback from members, because I think getting to understand member concerns from the grassroots level is really important to good administration. And one of the things that I've been very pleased with the Tax Institute is that they've offered to be go-betweens between tax agents and your clients in relation to particular matters, and to take them up with the ATO so that we can work through them and get the full facts and see where we can improve, or see whether or not the complaint's justified or not. And that gives an opportunity to have a release the valve in relation to people that may see some concerns, and also allows the ATO to make improvements where improvements are called for. So I do encourage the Tax Institute to do that, and for tax agents to take up that offer, and if that can improve the way we do things, all the better. I prepared a fairly lengthy tome on something that I find really quite interesting, and something probably out of left field and maybe not that relevant to many tax agents, although interestingly enough we find that some tax agents and tax practitioners and lawyers either willingly or unwillingly or unwittingly get involved at the edges of serious and organised crime. I find that the whole area of how Australia deals and seeks to address serious and organised crime is very interesting. So I did a paper there, and I said, well, maybe you might not see it all that interesting. So I've decided to divide my presentation into three parts. The third part is Q&A. The first part was more some strategic directions that we do, just to put a bit of a context to where I think, what are the sort of themes that guide the sort of activities that we do. What are the strategies, the real fundamental strategies behind a lot of our activities? And I thought of some words, and I thought of words like prevention better than cure, early engagement, differentiation, and online. And I just thought I'd add some meat to those bones by showing how that they apply across a number of our market segments. If you look at the work we're doing with large business, for instance, what we're trying to encourage is a lot more upfront sharing of risks, and that way trying to be early engagement, being upfront in terms of what our risk issues, getting some fast-tracking ways of resolving issues quickly, and that may mean disputation, but at least it's done early and not after the event. It gives much more practical certainty. I've taken the approach, and I've got to say that my arthritis in my hand's starting to feel it. I've signed something like 150 letters. Not only signed them, I read them and made changes to most of them in relation to all the key and high-risk large business groups in Australia, outlining where we think they rate on our risk differentiation framework, which sort of says, are you sort of high risk, low risk, medium risk, or a key taxpayer? And also where we've had some concerns, well, not so much concerns, but areas that we're going to focus on, because they're not a concern until we work out whether or not there are concerns. But these are focus areas, and highlighting the focus areas for them. And I've got to say that the feedback has been very, very positive from the companies, at least. Not so much from their advisors, but very much from the companies. Liv there is laughing, but it's true. They are very appreciative, and actually the boards are anxiously looking for these letters and then asking their tax areas, saying, well, how are we situated in this area? And I think what we're doing is really changing the the gameplay from the more traditional hide and seek approach to let's get it out in the open, let's see whether or not we can work it through. And I'm very encouraged the way that's doing. I think that is changing the platform, and it does help in terms of prevention. It gives more certainty and less surprises. It's early intervention, and hopefully it produces a good outcome for them. In the micro and small business area, again, one of the areas, and we've just got a new minister, and even the previous minister, the first questions that I'm asked is, well, what's the situation in terms of the economy? What's the situation in terms of debt, particularly? And we have a fair bit of, I think something like a bit under 5% of the revenue is debt, of which about 3/4 of that is collectible debt. So you've got a significant amount of collectible debt in the community, primarily at the micro level. This is businesses with turnover under $2 million, but also some in the SME that ranges from $2 million turnover to $250 million turnover. When we had the global financial crisis, we said, look, we don't want tax debts to be the final straw that makes it hard for people to trade out of their activities. So we had a very, what we call empathetic approach. We still have an empathetic approach, but over time, a couple of things have been a little bit starker for us. Sometimes we find that the long-term viability of the business is just not there. And the other area is situations where, allied to that, we often give payment arrangements and there's repeated failures to meet those payment arrangements. So in those sort of situations, we have to balance that empathetic approach with an approach of trying to say, well, you can't really keep on trading and out-competing your competitor on the basis that you haven't paid the debt, or you're not able to pay the debt, and therefore you're going to dig yourself a hole even deeper. So when you see the newspaper reports that says, ATO aggressive, read that is that after many attempts, there's been a lot of failures of payment arrangements in many situations, or the objective facts show that the prospects of viability are very slim. So that talks about early engagement for small business and micro businesses. Another area which is more in our compliance area is our benchmarking in relation to addressing cash economy concerns. For people who are significantly outside the benchmarks, then we ask for an explanation. For people within the benchmarks, all other things being equal, then we provide them with a degree of practical certainty. Again, that's the fact that you've got the benchmarks there allows you to monitor how your performance goes and does help in terms of preventing abuses of the system. A concern for small business, particularly micro businesses, is compliance costs. Unfortunately, that's not totally within the ATO's control. What we've seen is that layer upon layer of state, local, federal regulations, multiple reporting requirements, just become the straw that breaks the camel's back for many small businesses. And to me, there are a number of solutions, some of which require Commonwealth and state and local cooperation outside my ken. But some of the things that I think are important are things like standard business reporting and trying to have software packages with which apply to terms that are common across state, federal and local legislation, which then allows the business person to use those software applications automatically to pre-fill and send off reports to various government entities, whether it be Commonwealth, federal or state. So this comes back to the concept of online, which I think is probably an area where we can make Australia more efficient by using more online dealings into the future. For individuals, we have continued to expand the third-party information that we've obtained, most of it obtained voluntarily from suppliers, which is different from some countries that do better than Australia does in this area, where they mandate a lot more requirements than Australia has mandated so far. But anyhow, our direction is still to do more pre-filling, and pre-filling does save costs both for the taxpayer and for the agents. It was interesting when we started to move into pre-filling in 2007. I was at a Christmas. I gave a talk just before Christmas to, I think, the local chapter of one of the accounting professional bodies. And one tax agent really ruined my Christmas. He was telling me about the fact that pre-filling was bad for his practice. What we find now is that for tax agents, they use pre-filling more so than even individuals. They find that it helps the reverse workload of people not having information available to them when they come to do their returns. The other area that we're looking at in terms of online is trying to have an individuals portal next year, primarily to allow taxpayers and their agents to access superannuation information. But one can see that progressively we can use that portal for a range of functions that can allow the taxpayer to do things which at this point in time requires either a phone call or letters. For instance, questions about where is my return, they'll be able to see through the portal the progress of their return through our system, and that takes a bit of uncertainty away, and also will stop some of the reverse workflow for clients, for tax agents that get asked that question. In sort of moving forward, we keep what we call our 3 Cs pretty high on our agenda: consultation, collaboration and co-design. We do a lot of work with professional bodies and with industry and taxpayer groups, and we'll continue to do that. One of the things that was of interest to me, and we do a survey quite regularly with tax agents, and one of the themes that was coming out from some of the work there was that some tax agents believe, and in fact I read it in the tax vine as well, that they believe that they're not valued by the ATO. And let me say that the fact that we set up a separate tax agent and lodgement division, and that was only 6 years ago, reflects the fact that we still think that the partnership, well, at least the collaboration with tax agents, is really an important part of the system in Australia. And because of that, what I did earlier this year was to sort of launch what I call a refocus of our attention to the work that we do with tax agents, and we've called this the Tax Practitioner Action Plan. That's on the website, and we are consulting with professional groups right now on it, and we'll welcome your feedback. The 3 elements of the plan is to identify areas where we can improve the support we give you and work with you to design and implement the improvements. Increase the effectiveness of our consultation with the profession. Make sure that we are listening to you and acting on your feedback, or where we don't, explaining why we can't or why we think it's not a good idea. And also to increase your engagement with us in the development of our compliance program and strategies. So more and more I'll be seeking an input through your professional bodies in those areas, and I think your feedback to your bodies or directly to the ATO would be very welcome. One of the things that our survey work suggested was that can we improve first point of contact resolution, so we are trying to data mine the sort of questions that tax agents typically ask us to see whether or not we can find better ways of addressing that, or at least skilling our people to answer those common questions. What we often find that is that tax practitioners yes, they do ask those common questions, but often they get the difficulty with more complex arrangements. And so what I'm looking for is to bring together a range of support services, like our professional-to-professional service, our access to experts, and our relationship managers into a single point of contact. And that should allow you to get to the right person earlier. I think that will overcome some of the real concerns that tax agents have expressed to me. I think that'll be a good one. It's interesting, the professional-to-professional service was intended to do that, but it needed to be registered, and for some reason we had a low take-up. So hopefully with this refocus we can make that more available to more people. I mentioned before the online. I think as a profession, sort of the world's moving to online electronic transactions, and I think there is a need for us to move with the times as well. A lot of tax agents already use a lot of online. A lot of the work that we do with tax agents is through the portal, so that's a very important aspect of our support to tax agents. Last year there was something like 32 million logins to the portal, 15 million transactions through the portal. So you can see that by and large as a profession, tax practitioners are using online processes, and all I'm saying is that that's likely to increase over time. In the interim, as we move to platforms like standard business reporting, which will take some time to transition, there are some things that we can do. The problem with our portal at the moment is that it's on a platform that is more fragile, and I need to redevelop the platform, and that takes some time and some effort. So in the meantime, what I can do with the portal is limited. What we are looking at is things that we can do, things like the ability for practitioners to view and save copies of their clients' notices of assessment online, the opportunity of having more information about lodgement information about your clients, also access to prior year returns and lodgement status. So we'll be making those improvements and other improvements that you suggest that we can do on that platform. We will be trying to do. So that's, I just wanted to send the message that we still want to support tax practitioners and tax agents as much as we can, and we're very happy to listen to you in terms of ways that we can improve and overcome the irritants that you have, help you do your job better, and you can help us create an environment where you have high levels of willing and proper participation in Australia's tax and superannuation systems. That was part one of my presentation. How's my time going? Better hurry on part two. Part two is that what I find really exciting, which is the disrupting the business model of serious and organised crime. And it is important because crime is serious and organised crime is very it's a very sort of it's estimated to cost the community something like $15 billion plus. This is serious and organised, not just ordinary crime. And you think about the ATO as one of the institutions of government, and with a broader mission of trying to improve the well-being of Australians. And so it makes a certain sense to do that. And it's even more obvious in terms of the sense because the rationale for serious and organised crime is very much tied to the profit motive. So if you can help disrupt that profit intent, then you can play a real part in trying to curb serious and organised crime. So you can see how obvious the link is, and in fact it's actually more obvious than that, because when you think about serious and organised crime, you'll find that the people who actually, the puppeteers who actually pull the strings, they're not the ones committing the actual crime. So traditional crime and punishment approaches really take you at the bottom levels of that organisation and never at the top levels. But to the extent to which the top levels are interested in the profit from criminal activities, disrupting their profit does disrupt their operations in a significant way. Our foray into this area really began in the 1980s. In 1985, we were given authority to share information with the National Crimes Authority on serious and organised crime. In 1989, we were able to provide information to law enforcement bodies in relation to serious crime. And in fact, David Lusty did a wonderful paper back in 2003, said, in the very first matter investigated by the National Crimes Authority, the two agencies, the NCA and the ATO, combined to convict Abe Savron, Australia's Al Capone, of conspiring to defraud the Commonwealth by failing to declare his ill-gotten gains to the ATO. So today you'll find that the ATO is very much ensconced in the Commonwealth Organised Crime Strategic Framework. It's interesting, not only do I read the tax vine, but if you read a lot of the newspaper reports, you'll find quite commonly joint task forces disrupting crime, whether it be at a state or federal level, and often with the ATO in tow. I think that's an appropriate direction. One of the things that has evolved in recent times has been the use of task forces. And I've got to say that this has been, in part, helped and pioneered through the work we've done in Project Wickenby, but we've got other task forces now with particularly Australian Crimes Commission. The Commissioner of Taxation is now statutorily a member of the Australian Crimes Commission Board and also a member of the Commonwealth Heads of Law Enforcement Agencies Forum. So where there is a purpose of protecting the public finances of Australia, we can play a role in those prescribed task forces. And of course, as serious and organised crime does have a profit element to it, it's pretty easy to find one of those purposes in those task forces. We're currently prescribed in the Criminal Assets Confiscation Task Force. That's headed by the Australian Federal Police. It has the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions and the Australian Crimes Commission and the ATO. And that's about trying to organise confiscation of criminal wealth through the range of policies that we have across the Commonwealth. In other areas, the National Criminal Intelligence Fusion Centre, that's about bringing together a picture of organised crime, working out national threat assessments, working out which are the real big players in organised crime in the Australian scene. What we're finding is under that we've been able to piece together a lot more intelligence that, if left by individual agencies, would have been not that useful, and we're able to bring it together in a much better picture of organised crime in Australia. I mentioned beforehand Project Wickenby. There's no doubt that Project Wickenby has been a template for some of these task forces. Basically, that project, which was aimed at trying to address the abusive use of tax secrecy jurisdictions, which had a very specific tax angle to it, but the way that it was brought together using eight or nine Commonwealth agencies, also using a lot of international networks, either networks that we had through tax administrations overseas, networks that the police had through Interpol, networks that the Australian Government Solicitor and also Attorney General's Department had in terms of mutual assistance procedures for law enforcement. Bringing all those together is really the template for the task forces of the future. And it's very pleasing that we recently had an ANAO report on Project Wickenby, and the ANAO report concluded, as a result of Project Wickenby's focus on preventing the abusive use of secrecy havens, Australia is presently less attractive for international tax fraud and evasion than it otherwise would have been. And I think that's quite important for the community. One of the players that we use in terms of combined activities for Project Wickenby has been AUSTRAC. AUSTRAC is the sort of anti-money laundering regulator and intelligence unit, and it has a facility of tracking international flows of funds. And through AUSTRAC we've been able to get some idea of the effectiveness of Project Wickenby. The flow of money, for instance, to Switzerland has decreased by 22% over the last few years, by 50% to Vanuatu, and by 80% to Liechtenstein. And on the other side of the ledger, we've seen increases in the repatriation of funds from those jurisdictions to Australia. One of the, as I said, in the realm of law enforcement, one of the real successes of Wickenby has been to be a blueprint for other task forces. I think that value of what we've done in that space can't be undervalued, and you'll see it playing out in the fight against organised crime on a day-to-day basis. Another thing that's been really important has been the deepening of the cooperation across international borders, and also I think the fact that internationally there's been a change to much more cooperative arrangements. I mean, 10 years ago you would not have seen the pressure on tax secrecy jurisdictions to sign tax information exchange agreements. It was only last year that Australia signed the Mutual Assistance, the OECD Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters. So you can see a much stronger international cooperation. We currently have 33 tax information exchange agreements now with jurisdictions which in the past would have been secrecy havens. And so the framework of trying to be able to gather information is becoming much wider. And, you know, is it working? People can sign these documents, but does it play out to really any real benefit? And that was a question I had in the back of my mind as Australia signed some of these agreements. Will they be effective on the ground? And I've got to say that again, we've got I think something like 25 of the 25 that are currently in force. We've already made 43 requests for information, and we've already received 29 responses, and those responses have been quite fulsome. So, just another area of trying to track illegal wealth, illegal funds, or inappropriate or abusive use of funds. One of the reasons I'm making this comment about Wickenby is that the ANA found that the knowledge of Project Wickenby across the community was not as high as we would have hoped, and in fact it was not as high as we would have hoped across tax agents. So while I had a captive audience, and thank you for coming, I thought I'd share with you that Project Wickenby has been very successful in that area. The Director of Public Prosecutions, for instance, had this to say: "I have little doubt that Project Wickenby has had a strong impact in deterring potential offenders. The progress should also give millions of honest taxpayers confidence that individuals with sufficient resources and access to skilled professional advice will no longer be able to steal from the community with impunity." That's Chris's comments. So what do we see in the future? I think in the future you'll see more multi-agency task forces, particularly focusing on what are the sort of, to use a technical term, the extreme risk threat assessments done by the Australian Crimes Commission. And we would see ourselves aligning a lot of our resources that we do in the area of illegal and criminal wealth to back up what is seen as, for the Commonwealth, as the key areas of concern for this country in terms of serious and organised crime. So we'll be playing very much a supportive role in that area. And I think that's an important area for us to try to contribute to the well-being of Australians. The Roman philosopher and statesman Seneca said in the 1st century AD, "Who profits by a crime commits it." He also said, "He who does not prevent a crime encourages it." So the evolution, and some might say revolution, within the ATO to be an important partner in law enforcement agencies, I think is an affirmation of Seneca's principles. So thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to questions more broadly about issues of tax or super administration. Thanks. I think there are microphones out there, and I'm happy to take any question, and I can only answer the ones that I can answer.
Good morning.
My goodness.
must have stunned them, Michael.
Good morning. I've dealt with individual international taxes for many years, and I want to ask you about the targeting of the financial tracking in relation to individuals.
Well, I think...
Sorry, can I just ask the question as well?
Yep.
Actually, I'm
just
over
trying to look...
here.
Oh, that's right. I just couldn't see you. Sorry.
That's all right. In the last month, I've dealt with 2 inquiries which have come out of the financial tracking area. And it just indicates to me that the questions that your computer is cross-checking against are not working well. Because, for example, in one case, the letter from the tax office said that the person was a resident of Australia for tax purposes and as such should declare worldwide income, and we all agree with that. The only problem is this particular person's been a non-resident for 10 years and has filed tax returns on that basis. The second one was in relation to trying to determine, and this was after an audit in relation to the year to 30th of June 2011, we finally found out what was wrong, and that was there was some financial tracking going back to the year to 30th of June 2008, wherein if that question had been asked initially, in this circumstance we had $80,000 being declared assessable income, and in fact that $80,000 was made up of transfers into Australia prior to the person becoming a resident for the first time in order to set up a household. I don't think that's good targeting, and I don't think it helps anybody.
Well, I think one of the things that happens, and I don't disagree with what you said in the sense of targeting. What happens when you're dealing with a lot of flows of information is that data quality becomes an issue, clearly an issue. What you have to do with data quality is that you have to sort of continually refine and evolve and improve that so that ultimately it becomes that much more accurate. I mean, we have a lot of data quality issues across a range of information, not just in the international area, but even in the domestic matching of exercise. We have data quality issues in terms of sometimes not being able to match people by name, and particularly if they're non-residents, they don't have a tax file number originally, and therefore without a tax file number you're tracking on name and address, and that's hard for the systems then to bring all that together. I don't disagree with your point. Hopefully those are resolved on a case-by-case basis, and I apologise for the inconvenience. As we learn, we refine our systems. As the systems are refined, the data is improved. As the data is improved, they become more accurate, and you get less wrong or incorrect or unlinked sources of information. So apologies for those cases, but my objective would be to try to keep on improving the systems so that that level of matching becomes all the more accurate.
Thanks. Michael, just a couple of sort of comments about the Project Wickenby type task force. There's been some discussion, as I recall, in the press over the last year or so, when is this going to wind up? The point there is that I'd imagine when it is eventually wound up to task force, it must run its time, that the message goes out, job done. Well, it isn't done. I mean, obviously you've got to keep on these things. So how are you going to deal with that perception when it moves on that you're still on the track? And secondly, that's been a very important initiative, but there's probably more bucks in the cash economy still in Australia, and that I don't think's quite got the same rigour. I don't think people perceive that there's the same focus on the cash economy as there's possibly been on the international economy. There's probably more dollars involved. So what are your initiatives there?
Yeah, well, thanks, Ken. I think one of the things that the ANAO said in its report on Project Wickenby is that while we've made some success, significant success in making Australia less attractive to schemes that allow people to make abusive use of tax secrecy jurisdictions, that there's still a risk. And so I don't think that that risk will necessarily abate, in 1 year or 2 years. And I think there's going to be a longer term focus on an area of abuse. Hopefully, over time, as we improve some of the information that we have across both domestic organisations and internationally, a lot of these processes can be better streamlined and automated and therefore require less resources. But the pursuit of criminal activity is really hard, difficult, yakka, requiring the expertise of Australian Federal Police, Australian Crimes Commission, ultimately involving the Director of Public Prosecution, very resource intensive. What happens is that if the government doesn't provide ongoing funding, these agencies will have to allocate their resources according to risk profiles. The ATO's risk profiling of the abusive use of tax havens is still high, although relative to other countries, by the way, this is not a big issue for Australia. But what you've got to do is make sure that it doesn't become an issue, because once it takes off, it's hard to claw back. So while we've got the fortunate position that not that many people have used or abused the system in the way that is more endemic in European countries, for instance, or certainly some European countries, we're not at that stage. And so in a lot of ways, Project Wikime is a prevention philosophy. It's trying to say to people, look, there's a real risk to do this, it's un-Australian and it hurts your neighbour. And I think it's having some success. So we will continue, and we will continue to bring the information together, and because we've got very good relationships now with the other bodies, I'm sure I can convince them to continue to have a reasonable focus, whatever their budget might well be, because the job isn't done. So I don't think there will be a hard closure on the project, not in my mind anyhow. On cash economy, that's a perennial issue. It's been in our compliance program now for a number of years as a high-profile area of endeavour. But I mentioned the benchmarking exercise here. It's only one of a number of strategies we have in the cash economy area. Some of them relate to the government's proposal to have reporting in the building and construction industry, for instance. So there's other areas of legislative issues, and we do a lot of third-party information, helps us with cash economy type things. But benchmarks, to my mind, has been a real strategic shift. We now cover something like 900 businesses, out of a population of maybe 2 million. So we're nearly half, 900,000, sorry. Nearly half the businesses now are covered through benchmarks. And again, as I said, it's the strategy is quite a simple one. If you're significantly outside the benchmarks, we ask you why, and if you're within it, then we've sort of capped the level of exposure to what we think is a lower risk profile. One of what we're seeing also is when we look at the data, and so how we deal with data now is really a real key way for good tax administrations to operate. How good your analytics is, how good your data mining, how good your data matching is really part and parcel of good tax administration. Data quality is a problem, and we try to improve that. So what we do is we actually sort of can cut across all those businesses, those 900,000 businesses. We can find out what region they're in. We can see if there's pockets there. We can see if they leverage off any particular tax agents. In fact, 50% of businesses that are significantly over the benchmarks have something like under 2,000 tax agents out of a population of 26,000. Now that could just be that's the clientele and the geographics of it, but what you can do is actually start to differentiate according to the intelligence that those analytical information provides to us.
William Rutledge, Mr Commissioner. On a much more mundane level than Project Wickenby, as a client that has mainly, practitioner with mainly small clients of investment portfolios, one of my frustrations is dealing with the statements of trust income from the large listed property trusts and unlisted ones, which no two are alike. And I was just wondering, is it possible for the tax office to come up with a standardised form for reporting trust income?
Yeah, look, that comes back to the early question about data quality, and the more standardised the information is, the much easier it is for us to deal with it, and for taxpayers and tax agents to deal with it electronically. As I said, Australia's not gone down the route of a lot of other countries where they actually mandate data standards. We're doing a lot of work now with Treasury and the superannuation funds to make sure that there are consistent super fund records that are aligned to our standard business reporting format and an agreed taxonomy of terms. We do, with the work that we do in that area, it's all voluntary. We spend a lot of time with the various funds trying to get them to be more consistent, but ultimately it's a question of whether or not they want to do it or not. For some small funds, the cost of changing their systems to get them aligned to data standards, they say, is prohibitive. So without any sort of real sanction, there's nothing more that I can do but to cajole them to have more consistent standards. And we do work with those groups to try to get some consistency in the information that comes to us. And my proposition is the more consistent it is, the easier it is for it to be digitised, the easier it is for tax agents and the taxpayers themselves to know their position and to then use the systems to do whatever reporting requirement is out of that exercise. So I'm on your side with this one, but without any sort of mandatory powers, I can just cajole them to achieve the outcome that you think is, which I and you think is the right outcome.
Hi, Michael. Hi, Katie Walsh from the AFR. Just following from Ken's question, given that the job isn't done, as you say, on Project Wickenby, do you have any plans to ask the government to extend the project or provide more funding? Or has the government responded to previous requests for more funding? And secondly to that, despite the tax liabilities raised under Wickenby being quite impressive and high, the tax collections are a small proportion of that. Do you have any plans to address that disparity and collect more of the tax owed?
Yeah, look, I can't say about what the government might have installed in terms of its plans, but I think the ANAO has reported very recently that it thinks there's still a risk in this area, and I'm sure the government will be mindful of that advice. From the ATO's perspective, whether or not there's any further government funding, we will be allocating resources to continue a job that we think is an important job to do. And I've spoken to other agencies and, they'll do the best they can to meet the risks, having regard to the many other risks that they have to meet as part of their law enforcement activities. That's the best I can give you in the first question. The second question, can you just remind me of the second question? I think I was out too late last night. Yeah, the reason I emphasise the recent signing of the OECD Mutual Convention on Tax Administration is that it allows for other countries to assist in debt recovery. And so this is quite new. We have done some debt recovery work, say with New Zealand through our bilateral treaties. This is a much wider treaty that covers all the G20 countries. So we're getting a little bit more power, opportunities to bring back from overseas some of the liabilities that are owing. Also, in terms of the liabilities, I mean, there's quite a lot of degree of disputation. People have argued the point consistently across these cases, whether it be for civil penalties or for criminal penalties. This is not an area where people don't fight for their ill-gotten gains. So I think that to me is an area that's we'll continue to pursue it. You'll find that figure will increase over time. But I think the real key point about Wickenby is the prevention, the deterrent effect that it has, and also I think the capability that's given the Commonwealth in terms of how to run task forces of this nature.
Hello, Michael. My name is Stephen Rose. Just two quick questions. Over to your right, sorry.
Sorry.
The benchmarking and further refinements, can you just let us know what's coming in that regard? Because obviously it's starting, there's still problems in that regard in sometimes misidentifying clients, structures cause differences, location, as you said.
Yeah, no, look, this is why I put it in the sort of simple terms of, well, let's ask for explanation. And we've been working with professional groups to say, well, how can we improve it so that we can overcome some irritants or some mismatches? How can we take into account things that might not be appropriate? So this is part and parcel of the question I said right at the beginning. If you find that the experience is such that it could have gone more smoothly, they're the sort of experiences that I'd like to know about it to see what we can do to do it. So in other words, I'm very much dependent on the feedback of how it operates on the ground, and that's going to be, we'll take that into account. We continually, I said, we refined our data sets. What we have in a benchmarking exercise is we start off with information that's from the tax returns. To the extent to which there is any sort of, let's say, skimming of cash, you'll find that there's therefore an automatic bias of the benchmarks to be lower than they otherwise would have been had there been no tax gap. So you've already got lower, and what we've then said is we have a range, and so again that starts to take into account more in terms of the figures. What we've also done now is when we actually ask for questions from areas, we start to think about geographic differences a lot more. Particularly at the moment now where you have sort of situations where you've had flooding or natural causes, and so we then try to look at group by postcodes those businesses that are outside, to look at whether or not the benchmark for that group and that locality is common or consistent. So I think we're trying to take on board the concern, and I think legitimate concern, that benchmarks are an aggregate average type proposition. The next, so I think what we will continue to refine that to make sure that we take into account geographic or personal issues. I think that's the next stage of that. But I think the interesting part is that we will also be working with those tax agents who have a high number of people above the threshold to get from them an understanding why, and it could be why for legitimate reasons, their clientele has a difference from national or even geographic averages. I mean, that's what it's there. I mean, that's why I say, look, it's the benchmarking is a process of asking for an explanation, and the more we get that, the more we'll build that back into our picture of how the economy works.
And the second one, just a quick one, with the pre-fills, are you looking at extending that to non-individuals? Because that's actually probably becoming a greater source of problem now that we know what we can get for individuals, and it seems difficult that why we can't get that for companies, trusts, partnerships, etc. Yeah,
it's we are exploring that. Again, it comes back to some of the data quality and data sets that are available to us, and we certainly don't have a comprehensive range of information to those various different structures. But look, I think the more we can bring in third-party information and help pre-fill returns across different types, it's certainly a direction that I'd like to go. We don't currently have the capability or the data sets that can do that with a degree of reliability. but we're still looking at it, and I think over time you'll see that we'll start to do a little bit more in that space. But I think I agree with you. No, I agree with you.
Michael, I think we've got time for one more question, I'd say.
Commissioner, if I may, Philip Smith, I'm a practitioner. Not long ago you made the decision to withdraw the small and micro business bookkeeping software which allowed small and micro businesses to basically have a level of education and also basic compliance that they knew the tax office had somewhat endorsed. At the time it was seen as a bit of withdrawal of small business resources, and given that the government's now appointed a small business commissioner and is changing their focus, will you be revisiting that resource from the tax office or making recommendations that something similar can be reintroduced?
Look, I actually, if you look at many of my presentations to whether it be the Tax Institute or COSBOA or other groups, I actually made quite a big deal of the e-record system that we'd set up back in the days of the introduction of GST for small businesses. The reason to not introduce it was partly a financial issue. But it was also a situation that the platform needed to be redeveloped, and so it became an even bigger financial issue. And over a 10-year period, there was a fair bit of question whether or not the ATO should be competing with software developers in the area of developing a software product. And so what we've been trying to do is provide a lot of assistance to software developers so that they can provide easy software products to the community. And when we look at the profile, I think there was something like 40,000 small businesses out of 2.5 million that used e-record. And I think progressively we'll be hoping that the software developers with their standard business reporting enhanced software packages should do the trick better than us trying to go into the software development game. As I said, I thought it was a good initiative on our part. I think it's just a situation where we've just moved on and letting the market have its say. And I'm not saying that doesn't have an impact for people, and I can understand people saying, well, it was useful.
I think perhaps we'll leave it there. Okay. Thank you, Michael. On behalf of the Tax Institute, I thank you for being, as you always are, engaged, approachable, passionate, and I think it was evidenced last night, personable. When Michael was paying attention to some of those particular points, I just want to make a couple of comments to William's question about trust and the tax accounting for trust. I mean, that's why the attention the Tax Institute is paying to the tax rewrite of Division 6 is so very important, to try to bring some ease to practitioners in that regard. In relation to benchmarks, I visited an office of an accountant last week who was talking about benchmarks, and he said, I never have any tax audits, and that's because I always make sure that all my clients are within the benchmark. I'm not sure that was an accounting effect or not, or whether they genuinely were within benchmarks. I think Michael's observations about law enforcement and organised crime, they just reminded me of a story that Peter Simpson used to tell. Peter Simpson was a second Commissioner of Taxation in the 1980s, and a very fine man. He was seconded as the ATO representative in Washington and spent a lot of time with the IRS people. And one day he told the story rather against himself. They invited him out for an access visit to some of the mafia places. He thought that'd be rather interesting to visit the mafia. So they said, well, we'll pick you up in the morning. So all these big caddies pulled up, as the story goes, and he hopped in and he said, well, first of all, we've got to go and get the armaments. They drove into an FBI place and started to load machine guns into the boot. And Peter sort of looked at that, and he wasn't very sure whether they were dinkum or they were just pulling his leg. And he said, look, perhaps I'll go next time. And he used to tell him that story against himself. Now, I'm sure it won't come to that, Michael, I don't know that I could see you armed with a machine gun, but it's very important. It's funny to think about it, but Michael's point about enforcement, cooperating with law enforcement, after all, the IRS did bring down Al Capone ultimately. Michael, on behalf of the Tax Institute and everyone here, thank you very much for your address this morning. Would you please join with me in thanking Michael?